Good evening. This is the Art Scene. I'm your host, Lila Snow. I'm going to start with Cherry Zavaris. She died about 2 years ago, and her family is placing work in appropriate museums. She called her work sites of conscience. She did concentration camps, slave quarters, and she has a show called Before the Spirits Are Swept Away. It's at the Alexandria Black History Museum. I want to talk about a book that has an unusual approach. It's about your body. It's called Your Body and the Stars. And it's unusual because it has a doctor, Stephanie Marengo, and an astrologer of all people, Rebecca Gordon. It's divided into chapters by the zodiac. And when I thought of an astrologer and a doctor, I thought of de Lautremont's comment about collage being like a sewing machine and an umbrella on a dissecting table. So any unusual approach that makes you pay attention to your body is worth looking at because it's different. Woody Allen has always thought that people sometimes look at a movie and say, is that director blind? Well, he did a film called Hollywood Ending, which has a Hollywood ending, in which he plays the director and he has hysterical blindness. So this is a secret no one's supposed to know. The way they get around it is they have a Chinese cameraman who doesn't speak English, and they confide in his translator, who's always around translating from Chinese. And he's supposed to cover for Woody Allen not being able to see. So if they come up with two props and they say, do you like this or do you like this? The Chinese translator has to get to him. Tia Leone plays his ex-wife, and she steals the show. Also, the movie opens with Woody Allen in a blizzard. Everyone thinks Canada is a frozen tundra, and he says, I'm in Canada and the wind is blowing. Well, the Hollywood ending is because they think it's going to be a total flop, which it is, according to American critics. But the French have always thought that Americans are comme les enfants. We're like children. They love Jerry Lewis. And so they see the movie and they say, it's the best American movie ever. Now for two books. Singles Game by Laura Weisberger. This is about tennis, and you learn a lot about tennis. It's also an industry. $2.7 million is given away at Wimbledon. So this is serious business. She has a publicist, a manager, a practice partner. She has a makeup artist who decides what clothing she should wear, and even the romances are choreographed to look good according to who's in the news. So this tennis player has Jake as her publicist. Her name is Charlotte. Her father is her manager. The book opens in Wimbledon, where because the tennis shoes have a dot of color, she's told that she can't wear them. She puts on substitute shoes and has a serious accident. So she gets a new manager, Todd, who sets up brutal sessions of practice. And you get a look at very wealthy people who invite tennis stars to their yacht. And so it goes on and ends up a year later. She only has like about 5 weeks off. A year later, we're back at Wimbledon to see what happens with all the right practice and the right tennis shoes. On to Home for Improvement. This shows you behind the scenes at a TV show. It's an interior decorator who goes into houses and apartments and fixes them up. She's Lily. She works with Curtis the carpenter, and there are all kinds of horrible last-minute things, so it's interesting the way she operates. But the most amusing part is she works out with two pals, and they share Giorgio, their trainer, and that's when they discuss their sexual encounters, which shocks Giorgio, and it shocked me. And he keeps saying, "Focus, ladies, focus," when they get into some pretty racy territory. On to what happened when Bob Dylan was given the Nobel Prize. Of course, everyone was saying, Bob Dylan, literature. Here was Philip Roth waiting and waiting and hanging in the winds. And then he was shocking in his reaction. He didn't take the phone call. It wasn't clear that he would show up, and then he didn't show up. So I thought of the time in 1997 when Dario Po, an Italian, won the Literature Prize. And the Italians said, "Who? I mean, he's never written anything." Well, he comes from a tradition. In La Strada, the Fellini film, shows these itinerant theater groups that go from town to town. He comes from a little town on Lake Maggiore where the fishermen, while repairing their nets, tell stories. There's also a tradition in old Cuba. I thought this was remarkable. The Cuban cigar workers hire somebody. Now they probably just listen to loud TV or something like that. But they had someone read literature. And so this is quite a tradition of sort of unexpected authors. And he's most famous, he's really quite a lefty, and I think that played a role in getting the Nobel Prize. The committee likes political stuff. And he wrote Accidental Death of an Anarchist, which he says was not accidental. It was an anarchist accused of being a terrorist who they say jumped from the fourth story, but Dario Po says he was pushed. He just died at the age of 90, so I thought it was appropriate. There's a PBS documentary about Truman. It's so timely. Truman came out of no place. The bosses didn't want Wallace, so the Missouri party bosses set him up as senator, and then he became the vice president. And he never was part of FDR's inner circle. He met him twice. The cabinet left except for Stimson, so there he was. He was president for just a few months when he went to Potsdam to meet with Stalin and Churchill. He knew that we had the bomb. He thought Stalin didn't know, but Stalin did know because of Fuchs, a British physicist who worked at Los Alamos. And he moved the Russian program ahead 5 years. Truman never went to college. He was a failed farmer for 10 years. He was a failed haberdashery storekeeper for 10 years. He bought an oil well and sold it just before it struck oil. He had the same kind of luck with Bess, who he knew when he was 5 years old. She rejected him twice because she came from a rich family and finally said yes. And it was amazing. He The one thing he was successful at, he was in World War I. He cared for his soldiers. He came out of it so worried about war. And so dropping the bomb was only a presidential decision. But after Hiroshima, it automatically went to the military. And 3 days later, they dropped it on Nagasaki. And so he made it go back to a president-only decision. The president has 6 minutes to decide to retaliate. So this is quite an interesting and timely piece, given what's happening now. I was disappointed in Leanne Moriarty's Truly Madly Guilty. I usually like her. She's Australian and she gives an Australian twist to everything, but I felt manipulated with this. It's the story of Clementine, who's a cellist, her husband Sam. They have 2 little girls, and she has a friend from the age of 5, Erica, whose mother was a hoarder. And so Clementine's mother takes Eric on, and she's raised alongside with Clementine. She has a husband, and they're unsuccessfully trying to have children. They're invited to a neighbor's party. This neighbor loves to party, and he has very loud parties, and there's Harry, the old neighbor, who doesn't like noise. So everything points you to the barbecue, the party, and the accident. And you keep going because you have to find out what happened at the barbecue. And she plays with you, the author, and you finally get to that. It really keeps you going. Then there's Commonwealth, as in the Commonwealth of Virginia, which is Ann Patchett's latest book. And this is 2 families. One has 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls. One has 2 girls. They're neighbors. It starts with the baptism of Franny. And the families merge because the father wants to switch families. They solve the problem of custody because they move to the Commonwealth from Los Angeles by having the school year in Los Angeles and the summer vacations in Commonwealth. There's a subplot because this is the best part of it. A famous author gets to know Franny, who tells him her family story, and he steals it and makes it into a bestseller, and he also uses her for his fancy Hampton house to wait on his VIP guests. And so it's a double whammy for Franny. I have to get in my vent for Sister Wives, which is closing down. They have a family therapist. They need a family grammarian because they say things like, she's herself, like when it's just her and I. They start sentences with me and her and him. I can't stand it. So I'll see you next time on the art scene. This is Lila Snow.